The great news is that for motorsport fans, this speedway will be open in September. We always indicated that we'd make sure that there was a continuance in the sport, and of course as part of that, making sure that we don't ever see a speedway in Sydney move again. This is an absolute boomer. It's one which is going to be fantastic for the fans. It doesn't look like it'll be ready, but it'll be ready in September.
And we know that this will be the hub and be the Western Sydney as the home of motorsport, so we're really excited and thank Minister Constance and thank the government for investing on top of the 33 million to ensure that this happens on time and we haven't interrupted the season.
The operator out at the other racetrack had a fair bit to say about my ability to deliver this, so guess what, here it is.
Western Sydney Speedway, constructed by the New South Wales Government to replace Parramatta Raceway, which had been operating since 1978. This transpired because the New South Wales Government wanted the Parramatta site for redevelopment as a part of its vision for Sydney Metro, Australia's largest public transport project. Today on Beneath the Surface, we separate fact from fiction surrounding a motorsport venue plagued by controversy. Yes, the Western Sydney Speedway at Eastern Creek in Sydney's west has been the subject of immense speculation, scrutiny by the media, and social media platforms have been lighting up for several years now, with disgruntled race fans expressing their dissatisfaction. Today we're going to present on Beneath the Surface the facts of exactly what has transpired at a venue that was supposed to cost the taxpayers of New South Wales $40 million, but it's blown out to $130 million. And during that period, a sport has been decimated. John Kelly is with me, and John, you were the inaugural promoter when the venue was constructed to replace Parramatta City Raceway, your organisation, with partners Kathy Kelly and Scott Anderson. You probably thought you were about to live the dream, but it became a nightmare.
It certainly was that, that's for sure. Yeah, well, we walked in there in December of 2000, and I think it was 22, and what was it, 21? 21 it might have been, just after COVID, and I thought, gee, wow, well, isn't this place spectacular? You know, we'd seen pictures and all that sort of thing, but to get there and actually see it, I thought, geez. But yes, then it turned into just a nightmare.
Yeah. For the benefit of people that are watching this that may not know the history, you were the promoter of the Archerfield Speedway in Brisbane for more than 20 years with incredible success. Arguably the sport's most successful private promoter. The writing was on the wall that venue would eventually be closed and the land redeveloped for industrial land, and it was being talked about for a long time.
Yeah.
And eventually it happened. So clearly when you learned of the plan to replace Parramatta City Raceway with the new Eastern Creek venue, you thought, here's my plan, here's my future, once Archerfield closes. Have I got that right?
Yeah, similar to that. We were actually ran Archerfield for 23 years, and we also ran Toowoomba for 3 years as well. In the 3 years we were there, that was for Barry and Felicity Waldron, actually, who had Parramatta Speedway at the time. And they were obviously the people that were promoting Parramatta when the land was taken away. So we had a little bit of insight into what was going on, and there was obviously issues Barry and Felicity had with the government at the time when they were going to take Parramatta, and we went to Sydney as independents actually on their behalf as well to talk it through with the government. Okay,
now, so for the 2 seasons that you occupied the promoter's seat at what was then called Eastern Creek Speedway, now Western Sydney Speedway, as we said off the top today, you were effectively running 2 venues, which would have been incredibly exhausting.
Yeah, we got a few frequent flyer miles up there with Qantas at the time, and yeah, it was hard, but I mean, because we were used to it, because we'd done the time at Toowoomba as well before that, so we could make everything work, and it was back and forth. But and the reason when you say Western Sydney now, that's called Western Sydney Speedway, we called it Eastern Creek because we went through this in Brisbane. When we took over Archfield Speedway, it was Archfield Speedway, which Speedway, and we changed it to Brisbane International Speedway because it was what everybody did, I think, at the time. But you still had to tell the story, where is it at? So that's why when we took Eastern Creek on, we called it Eastern Creek, because that's the easier way to market it.
Yeah, I get that. I admire your tenacity to make the decision to come on this podcast, because you personally were subjected to such incredible ridicule when your tenure at Eastern Creek ended, most of which was completely unjustified. Social media platforms going off their proverbial heads with posts from people that have no clue about the facts. So you're here today to tell the facts. And those facts lead to gross ineptness by the state government and a complete waste of public funds in terms of what it ended up costing. If they had have listened in the first place, it would be a vastly different result.
It's an incredible sport. I prefer the F1, but ultimately there's a lot of people who love this sport. Rev heading that. So ultimately we'll have a world-class operator. Can I just say, the operators at the old Parramatta site were doing an incredible job. So I hope they're bidding.
With the tender process, what did that involve? What did you have to do? What did you have to present? And were you aware of there being any other tenderers in the mix?
At the time, we obviously knew there was going to be other people tendering. We weren't sure. We knew that because of it's such a complex industry and weather-driven and all them sort of things. So a lot of people don't understand that's the speedway. You can do everything you want during the week, and then come to the weekend and down comes the rain. So you had to look at what the costs were. Obviously, our experience in the game, for doing it for so long, for 23 years, our knowledge of the industry, because I'd been in various boards and in clubs and associations from the ground up, from being a competitor back in the day. So we were sort of ready for what, because Brisbane's a big city racetrack, and we ran so many races. So, and to come to Parramatta, been to Parramatta over the years, and I thought because it was new and exciting, it was going to be something. We didn't have that luxury at Archfield. She was a bit of sort of run down, but it was a great racetrack. But to come somewhere, have something new, was something to look forward to.
On a lighter note, the head wound, was that sustained because of all the time you were banging your head against the brick wall?
I probably opened it up a couple of times since then, but that's my handyman work. I don't like to sit still.
Altercation with a roller door?
With a roller door, yes. It was on the weekend.
So you successfully win the tender. At that point, or prior to that point, I would have thought the government would have put a lease in front of you which outlined all the financials associated with earning the speedway promotional rights of the venue. Is that what happened?
Well, as they say, it was probably a grossly misleading document to start with. They didn't have any idea of what they were building and what the costs were. Quite obvious by the fact that I was in Sydney, went down to, it was at Sydney Olympic Park. We met with the government that first time when they were just thinking about taking Parramatta away and what they were going to do, because the government promised that we'll take the speedway, we'll build a new one, and we'll do that within 12 months. So then they got people in there to design it and do things. Well, the designer had never even been to a speedway. There's your first problem. So he seen it on YouTube. So that's how we...
So the designer?
The designer had never been to a speedway meeting. So that's your first problem, isn't it? You see...
A designer appointed by the Berejiklian Liberal government at the time.
Yeah, well, it was that they were in government at the time, the Liberal Party. And obviously they were voted out, I think, the next election, but probably not to do with this, but just that's governments. But the thing was, when we went to this meeting in Sydney at Olympic Park, they said it was going to cost $40 million to build it. I put my hand up and asked the question. There was about 6 other people there in different government parties. That were
Sorry, so construction had begun?
No, this is before they've even turned to dirt,
Okay.
done anything. They're going to make the acquisition to take the land, and then they're going to go from there and build a speedway. So at the time, when they said they're going to spend $40 million, I go to a meeting and ask questions. So I asked the question, is $40 million you're going to spend? And
did you think $40 million was extravagant?
Oh, ridiculous to build a speedway. So when I asked the question, we moved on a few things, then come back to it. And I said, but sure, it's $40 million. You plan on getting a return on your money? And they actually, because they had name tag on, said, no, John, I'm telling you, I'll repeat it again, that we have parks in the city, we maintain them, we do this for the community. That's what we're doing. We're taking away the speedway and we're going to build a new speedway, because that's what we do as a government for the community.
Well, nothing
good.
wrong with that in theory.
Well, I told them that. I said, that's great that you're going to do this as long as you don't plan to get on a return.
We are talking about a multi-million-dollar industry that employs a lot of people and generates serious income for the economy. So obviously they were aware of that and moved forward.
Well, they were made aware of it many times, as well as I even went to the analogy one time. I remember going to Sydney Showgrounds with my father back in the day before Parramatta even, and I said, you're building a venue that's going to be there for 50 to 100 years. It'll see my time out. And you just got to be mindful of what you're building and the amount of money you're going to spend, and it's got to be done right. And but everything fell on deaf ears.
So you would have had an expectation at that point, once the government appointed a designer, who in your own words had never been to a speedway, you would have had an expectation that you would be consulted, that your input would be valuable?
Well, we were consulted. There was probably different people at the time from around the sport in Australia. There was different guys from Western Australia that come from Victoria and things like that. Because and you got to understand, they didn't know what they're building. There's no doubt about that. They build Sydney Metro, actually build train stations really, and railway. So we knew that they didn't have a clue. So you're trying to help them along the way on what to design, what to build, how it should be built, the way the fence should have been done, the security sort of side of things, offices, for late at night, when you're stuck there. So we went through a lot of things that we went through. And at the time it was in COVID too. So here we are having Zoom meetings and things like that. So there was no face-to-face meetings. It was all done on Zoom basically. After we must have went to the first meeting in early, maybe it was February. It was the first meeting at that one at Olympic Park. And then COVID hit, basically shut us all down in March.
During the period, the early stages, when construction began and the designer was doing what they were appointed to do, how far down the track before you started to realise or, have some light bulb moments that, hang on, they're not listening, this is wrong? You already were blown away by the $40 million commitment. You're saying it could have been done for a lot less. And as we sit here now, it's $130 million. Hello. At what point did you become frustrated?
I was frustrated pretty early in the piece. It came down because my expertise is basically the racetrack and what we've got to do and to race on it. Kathy's the accountant. She does all the paperwork. Scott was an IT technician and all that sort of thing. So we had a good mix of people that were going to run the speedway. But my frustration was the fence. Like we're designing a fence and I'm trying to explain to them that water doesn't go uphill. So how you got to water the racetrack from the bottom, we go to the top, so you spiral up and spiral out. And I wanted the fence similar to what Archfield. So when you run the water truck around the last one, you drive back out into the pit area to get more water and come back out. So you spiral out. So it's work bottom, work to the top because, you've got to do quite a few truckloads. And they were going to do this. And you'd look at the design and say, well, hang on, what about the fence, the gate? Well, no, we're fixing that. That's right. And that went on numerous times until eventually got there and seen it, and then they couldn't change it. They didn't listen. They never listened to a thing they were told.
Unbelievable. So the venue was scheduled to open, I think, late 22, if memory serves me correctly.
Yeah, it was actually the 4th of December we were supposed to open. It was because Aaron's 21st birthday it would have been. Right. So, that was the 4th of December. And
all that was achieved that year, late in the year, was, I think, a practice night?
We got a practice night in on I think it was the 19th of December. So we ran 2 of them, a Saturday and then a Monday.
All right, so 2023 season commencement of theoretically rolls around. At that point in time, so we're all, 10 months after the practice night, approximately?
We got some shows in. We were supposed to run in January, actually. We were supposed to do the practice night, which we did that. And then we were supposed to open on the 14th of January that year. So we'd do the practice nights and be ready to open January. And then we were going to, aim to do that. And then we got a message that, no, the facility won't be ready. Thought we've just practiced on it. The toilet still had to be done and there was still a bit of work to be done. And it was going to be under an agreement to lease at the time because it was a license to operate. It wasn't actually. The lease wasn't put in place because of the fact they had to meet different milestones. So it was a permit I think they called it a permit actually, to run events. But then they said, no, the show's been cancelled, you can't run it. So we've gone ahead, we're going to run this on the January 13th, 14th, something like that it was. And the reason for that was because they hadn't put fire hydrants in. So there was sort of humorous because we'd been through training on what you had to do to evacuate, because there was an upstairs part in the grandstand area. We'll call it a grandstand, but there was really corporate suites at the top. But yeah, after we'd been on the training, there's only going to be one major problem. This is the sort of things that happen there. There's no fire hydrants to even fight the fire.
Mm. So around that period, the government stakeholders, which includes, I think, Western Sydney Parklands, which you can talk about in a moment, they gave you a commitment the venue would be turnkey and ready by a certain time. You worked towards that, and it kept being put off. So they not only let you down, they let the motorsport public down, the competitors with millions of dollars invested in equipment, needing to honour sponsor commitments and all of that. I mean, what a debacle. And who was your go in dealing with all those problems, the delayed start? Who was your point of contact? Was it Western Sydney Parklands or?
Yeah, Western Sydney Parklands. They were the people who are going to operate the facility once it's handed over by Sydney Metro. So Western Sydney Parklands controls that whole area, the Sydney Motorsport Park and the Dragway, the zoo. So that's the precinct that they control.
But it's a government instrumentality.
Yes, it's used by government money. Parklands
it's still a government with a different label on it.
Yeah, it's just another government department. So that's who we had to deal with. So, and they had consultants. I thought the people worked there. The main guy that we dealt with, he was just a consultant, it turned out. We find that's out 6 months later. So their care factor, a lot of these people, was none. They were doing their job, they move on to their next project and consult and do something else.
Yeah, I've seen documents that make for breathtaking, almost unbelievable reading, where your organisation has written to government stakeholders outlining a list of problems with the venue. This is well past the point of when they assured you it would be finished.
Yeah.
And sewage, toilets, electrical, drainage, lighting, solar power panels put in the wrong place that were being smashed, and I'm led to believe you were told you had to pay to have that fixed. And to rub salt into the wound, if I can use that expression, it's not like you got a turnkey venue anyway. Your organisation would have invested hundreds of thousands in infrastructure, canteen equipment, corporate box equipment, and all of that. So by this time, you must have been thinking, what have I done?
Well, I was, because most people expect me to say something and blow up or something like that. But I was lucky because we would be back and forth to Brisbane and left it in the hands of Scott, because the government was pretty smart on the way they manipulated things, because if Scott didn't agree to something, we left it in Scott's hand because he was living in Sydney, so he could duck out to the track and have a look at things and what's going on and do things. And if Scott didn't give them the answer they wanted, then they'd contact us. And in the end, we got to the stage where it was like mum and dad. You just go to tell the other person, see, mum will
playing you off against your own partner.
Yeah, so in the end, we just stopped talking to them altogether. So I left it in Scott's hands to deal with them, because there was only one person communicating with them. So I mean, the problems with the venue, like, you just can't believe that people will get paid the amount of money that these people are obviously getting paid. A lot of that money wasn't just for the speedway either, by the way. Dragway's got their hand in there. They had their nose,
that's an important point.
In the trough the whole way
Western
through.
Sydney Dragway is obviously I'll say a joint tenant, to keep it simple.
Well, they're on the same property, basically. And that's how this lease became. So when they moved the speedway out to Eastern Creek, they had to get some land. So they got some land back off, which is government property once again. This is the frustrating part. So they go to Dragway, and they got an operator there, which is apparently an ex-politician from Liverpool, Labor politician.
Really?
And he's in charge of it all. So he's done the negotiation. And they've got car parks, they've got all these things for this little parcel of land. A lot of people were worried early in the piece. I was getting phone calls from drivers and competitors around Australia, and one from Sydney, a high-profile driver, I don't know if we can say it, Max Dumsney, rang me and asked me about it. He said, this ain't going to fit. We've looked at it. This ain't going to fit on this block of land. And I said, no, I've seen the drawings. There definitely fits on that parcel of land, not knowing the Sydney area or knowing that area at all. But I'd seen the drawings and they were going to fit it on. But that was one of the biggest problems they ended up being. The undoing of it too is the fact that they jammed it into a corner of the land that they done a deal with Dragway to get some of the leased land back. And they fitted the track in, no problem, but then the pit area became a problem. The size of the grounds for parking, everything else escalated from... It was really a terrible place to put it.
Where I need to thank Toby Belbone from Sprint Car Hub, who's given us access to some venue vision that we're looking at currently, and we'll see more of it. With the list that I have seen, which probably comprises 20 points of really important things that were wrong. PA problems, and I've already rattled some of them off. At that point, when you were trying to get this rectified, it's doing a lot of damage to your company financially.
Yeah.
It's damaging your credibility. In the world of social media we live, people have got a platform to unleash, and
Yeah.
you know, some of the vitriol I saw targeted towards you was disgusting. And as I've said a couple of times already, it only served to decimate the industry, which is a terrible tragedy. At what point did you start thinking legal advice? I mean, it must have cost your firm hundreds of thousands of dollars, all this time wasting, postponing, dramas.
I reckon I dumped $500,000 on this deal. So, but at the end of the day, when you just go back a little bit, when the lease came out and we got the lease, this is the first problem we had. It was my anniversary. Kathy and I were walking down the beach with day off, and it was in the 11th of June it was. We were walking on the beach at Surfers Paradise, and when they made the phone call to tell us we were successful tender for the lease of the Speedway. But you can't tell anybody. We've got to go through the process. We've got to tell the people that were obviously put in a tender as well. We've got to notify them.
Who did that call come from?
That came from Peter Marshall, who was a consultant, as it turned out to be, who worked for Western Sydney Parklands at the time as a consultant.
Independent consultant
To the best of our knowledge. He made the phone call.
That's interesting. An independent consultant would make a call
to
inform a successful tenderer. That, to me, is a little bizarre.
I thought at the time he worked for him, because we had a lot of talks to him. You know, there was things that you were going through the lease, what you had to do, and we didn't get all the information, that's for sure. And you didn't know what the running costs for this venue were going to be. But in saying that, getting back to that part of it, when we got the thing, we weren't allowed to tell anybody. We didn't tell the kids. Never told any of the kids. It's going to take 2 weeks. We've got to notify them. That's going to be the process. And then we'll do a joint media release, and we'll do all this sort of thing. In the meantime, you can start getting your ducks in a row. What you want to do is a press release. Well, we didn't have any, drawings or, what would you call it, artwork or anything for signage or what we were going to do, how we're going to release it. But we're going to try and rattle some things up in the next week. But the most part, then they're going to get back to us once they notify the other tender, which happened to be Western Sydney Dragway.
Oh.
So how ironic that the Dragway, who, caused half the problem of the costs of this venue, they were the other tender. And they thought they had it. They were so pig-headed that he thought they were going to get it anyway because they're going to make life as difficult as they could. And, there was...
You're saying the Dragway didn't want the Speedway there, or if there were to be a Speedway, they wanted control? They
probably wanted to control the Speedway, so there was problem with dust went on, and there was going to be noise problems. It's ironic the Dragway doesn't have noise problems, yet Speedway had to have noise restrictions in place. But in saying that, getting back to this part, so we were told not to say anything for 2 weeks. So we're getting everything ready to do this joint press release when you say Toby Belbone. 2 days before we're going to be able to announce this, Dragway notified Toby Belbone that they didn't get the tender and release that we had won the tender. So then Toby goes straight to the media and releases it. And we didn't even get the opportunity to release that we'd won the tender for the Speedway. So then all hell broke loose for the 2 days. Then Western Sydney Parklands has to look at the media release, do this, do that. And that was ongoing with any media release you had. It was really frustrating because when the track wasn't suitable to run and all that sort of things, you had to go to them. It could take them 14 days to tell something, hang on, we're going to race on the weekend, but we're not allowed to race, but we can't have a media release. We look like pack idiots. And they just didn't care. I mean, the people there were terrible.
You're saying, to put it simplistically, if you were planning a race meeting, you couldn't do a media release to provide the public with the details of that race meeting until they approved it? Is that what you mean?
We could actually do the release that we were going to run the event, but if in the event that it was going to be cancelled through no fault of ours, then we couldn't just put a press release, this event's been cancelled, we're going to move the date. They had to do that. But in saying that, that could drag on, so we'd have to just basically say but just pull it off, basically, because you couldn't say why you pulled it out or why the venue was closed, why we couldn't operate.
All right. So your operations were plagued by a litany of major structural issues. Let's look at the period you were involved there. How many events would you have run?
I think we did 5 in that first year. That's all we got in. That was what we did open in February.
Instead of the plan?
The original plan was to run about 20 races that year. The second year we were to run 26, 28 races, something like that. Perfect World Speedways, it's not a 40-race calendar anymore.
It's not the days of everyday Speedway. Agreed.
Real numbers probably in the city of 25 to 30 race meetings.
All right, so you planned 20 for season 1, you got 5 in due to the inherent issues that you discovered. And then you planned courageously to hang around and schedule 20 for the next term. And how many did you get in that year? Or that season?
I may have got 14 or 15, that was all out of that following season. So we got a few more in, but we were plagued by, water leakage, on the infield. That was ongoing. There were things, like Scott made numerous times, said, well, let's just pull the pin on it. Until it's fixed, done, then we're not going to operate this venue. But they kept wanting us to do it because...
Well, they were going to look very bad.
Yeah. Well, in the end, they shafted us, and there's no doubt about that.
All right, we'll get to that. We should also remind viewers that during that period, the state government changed too.
Yeah.
So Labor came to power, and I suspect it would have suited their narrative to blame the previous government when
it was the best thing that ever happened for them.
You were going to them or Parklands or a plethora of contractors and what have you. So it would have suited them to say, sorry, we're sympathetic, but we didn't do this.
That was their answer all the time.
Yeah.
Was we inherited this problem. And that's what I mean, governments, us taxpayers.
Which is the same as saying, hypothetically, a major arterial road in Sydney breaks. And because the previous government built it, the new government's not going to fix it. I mean, that's just total and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
They're still the caretaker of the public's funds, taxpayer money. How much money do you think was spent during your period on rectification work, on fixing all of these issues?
Well, when we got towards...
Have you got a number?
Towards the end of it all, and how we come up with 100, we were at $100 million for something that was going to be 40 million. And then we were wandering around the grounds. I was taking us through the handover. You're going to have to do, this is 18 months later, we're going to do a handover.
Right.
For this facility. So whether we had to go through and work out how
is this late 23?
It would have been early 23. We'd been away. So we got booted out in I think it was just September 23.
Okay.
It was September 23, I think. But it was just before that. So we'd been away. They were doing things to try and stop the water seepage through the grounds and all these sort of things. And when we were wandering around, one of the ladies there, she wasn't very friendly. She was complaining to... she had a few run-ins with Leonie only because she was just a rude, arrogant lady, this woman. But anyway, she was complaining to this person. I was wandering around behind them, and she said, these ungrateful buggers, we've spent $6.8 million. Now, this is after we've already spent 100 on doing a few drains and things around the premises. So another six. So then we got to $106.8 million. That was probably in the last month or so that we were there. So I don't know if they spent much more after that. Since then... I was speaking to a guy from Sydney here, and he said that because he went to try and speak to the government, didn't have much luck. They were at $120 million then, and they've spent more money.
All right. So you said that your organisation was granted a licence to operate, not a lease per se. I assume that licence to operate had financials attached. I mean, you wouldn't have signed it otherwise unless you had a broad idea of what you're putting.
Well, we'd paid our lease. We'd paid in advance the rent part of that part of it. So they had our money for the rental of the property, but they couldn't enact the lease until they met their milestones. So
They're
we still had
milestones.
that they had to meet milestone 2 before they could ever enact it. So what they did is
Milestone
they gave
2
you
being?
where the facility was fit for purpose. So it was never fit for purpose when we
This is
left.
like circus stuff, really?
Well, that's how it ended up breaking down in the end, was because we're out on the racetrack and they got an independent guy to come in that had been tied up with road racing, and they must have known him from somewhere. So they figured he'd be a good person, knows a little bit about motor race. Finally we got someone that knows a little bit about motor racing. So he was the so-called independent that come out, and we'd have to speak to him, go through the
Consultant.
problems. Yeah, and well, I don't know if we would have been getting paid. Everyone else did get paid beside us. But we were standing out on the racetrack, and we've worked it out that there's not enough clay on this track. And we can go back through all of that sort of thing from day one when we walked in the place and the track's not even laid and the fence isn't up, and we're going to practice on Friday. And that was a Monday that we got in there. But and that's another thing on where I believe what happened with the racetrack and how the debris got in the racetrack. But that's another thing. But the dirt was never there. So when they were building it, they were going to lay the clay. There was going to be 500 mil of virgin clay, screened, done perfect. Even sent me samples to Brisbane. Have a look at this clay. What's this one? That's no good. Send it back. They'd send you tubs, and we picked some clay.
Were those clay samples sent to Brisbane on a courier or postage? I'm joking.
I think
Keep
they
going.
were postage, actually.
Keep going.
But anyway, so we'd have the clay, and they wanted to know how they're going to lay the clay. Once again, they have no idea what they're going to do, and I told them they're going to be 200 mil, lay it like the pavement, like the road, as hard as you like, pack it down as hard as you like. They're going to put another 200 mil on top, lay that as hard, once again, pack it down like it's concrete, whatever, nail it down. The last 100 mils bit we play with, to do a racetrack. But that didn't happen either. But anyway, so when we got down to with the loop would get pulled out because it's 300 mil that's supposed to be, this is a timing loop that we had to get put in there because they didn't think you needed a timing loop. They hadn't, like I said, no clock, no timing.
Oh,
They must have thought back in the day you'd have people just sitting up there scoring.
another thing they didn't listen to.
Another thing that they hadn't listened to. So anyway, we got all that done, and we were out there doing this clay that day, and we'd had a lot of issues with the track anyway. And the loop getting to this, it's supposed to be 300 mil. At Archfield, we put it in ourselves back in the day when they first came out, loops. Never ripped it out ever in all the years we were there. And it probably 15 years because originally we did have lap scorers, and never ripped it out. And yet we ripped it out twice since then. It's been ripped out again since then.
All right.
And because it wasn't put down low enough, we'd sit there and argue then it wasn't 300 mil. One time we went to the fence and we're digging down and it's down 150 mil. I said, well, there's your first problem. It's supposed to be down 300. But it is. But they're trying to say the tyre track or the grader's making this thing, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, the problem with the dirt, this is right before the final couple of days where they're trying to get us to sign now that they've met their milestones, and we're like, no, we haven't. What about the clay? What are we doing about the race surface? There's not enough dirt here.
Right.
So they're going to do this, and he says, we've agreed that they're going to bring in 120 truckloads of clay. And we've got a 2-week window to lay this clay, and I'm thinking, how am I going to do all that? So that was the first question. So they've gone away, they're going to source it, the whole that thing. The very next day, they arrived back and said, you've got to sign the contract. So what do you mean we sign the contract? We've got to fix the clay. Remember, we're going to do that. No, we've looked at it, and we've decided that it's done.
So their interpretation of achieving milestone 2 was vastly different to yours.
Certainly was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they present a lease in real terms. May I ask what period that was over? Was that 5-year lease, 10-year lease, 20-year lease?
The lease was through until 2028, I believe. I think it was like 8-year lease. So that was to coincide with the others, the ARDC or the Dragway or something. They wanted all the leases to be aligned at a certain time. So we couldn't even extend that lease or have the option to extend it. There was just a set time. I'm pretty sure it would have been an 8-year term that we would have been there.
So no option at the end of the first period?
No,
Okay.
no. They're going to put it back to lease at the end of that period of once it ran out.
Okay, so you sit down calmly, despite all you'd endured in the 18 months leading up to this approximately, and you look at the lease, and is it true you had to call a paramedic for yourself? Because I'm hearing numbers, it was approximately all up $1 million a year.
Yeah, it was. That's what we say. It wasn't.
$1 million a year.
Yeah, and we
to promote at
became
a
aware.
venue
that early in the piece. We were 3 months in that we picked that up. That was to do with the Ocean Protect, the water, that runs off the facility, And this all comes down to new legislation and new laws. So it didn't apply to the ARDC. It doesn't apply to Dragway. But because this is a new venue and the same as what happened with the, you had to have the noise thing, the
Noise
dust monitoring because
Mm-hmm.
the dust was obviously a Dragway issue, which they knew all along. Well, let's face it, they're building a speedway next door to a drag strip. It doesn't affect Perth Motorplex.
Does the drag strip have to do the same with sound monitoring?
No.
When there's top fuel dragsters
no,
there?
No, that's the silly part about it. We had a
Nitro funny cars?
95 decibel limit. And here these things are with open exhaust, top fuel, like you said. I mean, that's the silly part.
So the beauty with having the speedway alongside the dragway and alongside the other main track, like it's not going to be too noisy for anybody particularly, and that's the best thing about this precinct. It's not disruptive.
Knowing that, we had a noise thing in place anyway. We put it in the same as we had in Brisbane because we had a lot of problems there, with noise and council. So that wasn't a big drama to get everyone to put mufflers on and do it. A lot of people ask the question, why? They'd ask that question, why aren't we running open mufflers like the Dragway? But that was the ruling.
So let's round it off at $1 million a year. You said it was an 8-year lease, approximately. Yeah. So an $8 million commitment at a venue that at best you might use 25 days a year, approximately. There is no way in the world that was ever going to be viable.
No, well, they said you signed the lease, but in saying that, with the lease, like I said, it was grossly misleading. There was
you
none
didn't
of
sign a lease. You signed a license to operate, you said.
Well, there was a lease in place to operate when they met their milestones. But at this time, when they signed the lease, the difference is there was no disclosure of the running costs. Nobody knew what they were going to build and the cost to build for this facility. When you think of building a speedway, you can't believe $40 million they weren't going to get a return. I told them that in the meeting. But when you blow it out to $100 million, you're trying to get a return. But on top of that, where are all these costs? We didn't know they're going to put this Ocean Protect thing in there. It's going to spend all this money because that's now the thing they put in place.
The Ocean Protect, can you, in simple terms?
So it's to stop. So when we get back to the design things as well, so some things we're going to have to back up. When they did the pit area, for instance, we're on a phone hookup and they've got a fence around the property. They're going to put grass area around the outside. Well, they asked, what do we do here? We're going to put roads. We're going to make it similar to the Motorplex,
right? Who
nobody went to look at. And that's half to do with COVID.
Nobody went to look at the Perth Motorplex?
No, they didn't get there. They said they did, but they didn't.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, I asked the question, is it for the green effect, to do with that sort of thing? Why don't we put the grass around the fence line, put all the trucks up on the grass and have the bitumen in the centre? Well, as it turns out, they couldn't, because it's all fill land, apparently you couldn't have, if we put the trucks up on a grass area, then the ground will sink, it wouldn't be stable enough and all the trucks would sink or whatever. And so in the end, they decided they're going to bitumen the whole area, the whole pit area. So that's not what happened there. So then you get the runoff. So then they had to feed this runoff, that the truck, the little bit of grime that you'll see in diesel vehicles or cars or whatever, it's going to run into the drains. Some of the stuff
so
goes
the race
to the
cars
tanks.
coming off the track with clay on their tyres.
The silt and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to go in. So there was baskets put in place.
So the Ocean Protect was an annual fee and a big one.
Yeah.
To safeguard the waterways. Is that
the frogs and the
what?
The frogs and the birds out that because so what happens is it overfills, goes into a tank. From the tank, then it has a spillway. So then once it fills up to its maximum capacity, it then goes out into the bush area, just runoff like
right.
Which Dragway doesn't have it. ARDC doesn't. But because they were built previous to this ruling or what they just thought, their idea was to put these in place. They didn't need to do this, but they did. So then it became part of the law. So this thing was going to cost $832,000 a year. This is what they told us. That's for this Ocean Protect to put the filter. Then it was another $60,000 on filters. And they said, well, you've signed the lease, but hang on. In the lease agreement, it had in there what sort of money you were going to spend on maintenance and upkeep. And we had in there, I'll tell anyone, it's $100,000 we put there. It's a brand new facility. $100,000 upkeep. Well, if someone runs into a building, wrecked it or done something and smashed something, then obviously there are costs that you have. But in general maintenance, that doesn't include doing lawns. It was $100,000 worth of maintenance and repairs and upgrades you might do to the facility. So that was stated. At no stage did we agree we were going to pay $1 million worth of upkeep on a facility. You can't make $1 million in Speedway, I'm telling you now.
No, of course not.
People might think we did, but you don't. You cannot make that sort of
In no form of motorsport.
No. And the other problem with the facility is its economy to scale. We were told it's going to hold 7,500 people. Well, they've built this place like a football stadium, with all these toilets, all these outlets, all the concrete, all these things that they've had to do to stabilise land and do things. But you can't get enough people in to pay the bills. So economy to scale doesn't work. 7,500 people. The opening night, we had 6,100 people, including the pit area, in the facility, and we're handing money back because people couldn't see and couldn't watch the racing.
Right.
So that's the real truth of it. It doesn't hold 7,500 people either.
Okay. So this lease is put in front of you and you consult with your partners and the decision is made. There's no way in the world we can sign this. It's not viable. What happened then? Things started to turn pretty ugly on, led to belief.
Well, that was probably earlier in the piece because we were getting so frustrated with the facility not being up to scratch. And then the problem, the lease was sort of assigned, but it couldn't be enacted until it met their milestones once again. But when you go back, all these other costs that were coming up, the IT equipment, the workmanship was the water leaking through the grounds. All these things were all adding up and more costs that you were going to incur. The solar panels that you brought up before, like in the design stage when we were building or suggesting how the place be built on this block of land, I had all the sheds there so that people could rent. So you can bring people from interstate or whatever and encourage them to come and race at the facility and had them all down the drag strip. There was two reasons for it being down along the edge of the drag strip was because one, to stop the dust that you knew was going to be a problem or whatever and put them all down there and noise and stuff when you're running twin events or whatever. So put all the sheds along their boundary, along that fence, and then the main shed, which was your workshop for your graders and your trucks and all that sort of stuff, was going to be just inside the gate on the right-hand side. Well, in actual fact, they put all the sheds were in the corner in turn 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. They then put the solar panels on top of the sheds there. They couldn't put them on top of the main grandstand area because of apparently the way the sun goes. Well, who are they kidding? There's no trees up there. There's nothing up there. Right. Any person that walks into that facility knows where them solar panels should have been put on top of the main straight away.
Right.
Not
and
on the
you warn
corners.
them against once
Do not
you
put
learn.
them there. So why would you put them there? Every single person walks in. Why would you put them? They get smashed with stuff. It's clay, all the stuff coming off the cars. Everything goes over the fence on top of these solar panels, which you've got to keep clean to be able to utilise them anyway.
And that became your responsibility.
That became our responsibility.
As a part of the maintenance each year.
And for example, in one of the discussions we had with them towards the end, when we were doing all the handovers or getting ready to do handovers, they said, you've got to keep them clean. Well, we didn't have to maintain that at that stage. Until they were meeting the milestones, we would keep the weeds down and do a bit of stuff like that. But you didn't have to do that, sort of would keep the grounds clean around the pit areas and sweep them and things. But the solar panels, when we got to that, so it goes back to a grid. There was no backup batteries, so they couldn't get the full benefit of them. And they were dirty and all that. So they've got to keep them clean. Well, these things are bringing back $32 a month, these solar panels. And I said, so we get $32 rebate out of these things. Why we got them there? They're all no good. They're smashed. I mean, they're a waste of time even having there. There's no return for these things. And they said, well, you got to keep them clean. I said, well, clean them. How long do you reckon it'll take to clean them? There's so many of them. There was 13 sheds there and all the solar panels on them. I said, how are you going to, if you keep them clean, how long is that going to take? They said, well, it'll take you'll have to do them every show. I said, really? I said, and how long do you reckon that'll take? I said, 2.5 days. I said, well, here's a thought. You go tell me who's going to work for $8 for 2.5 days a week every time we run a show. They couldn't grasp with the question you were asking them. It was like, no one's going to work for $8, mate, so get rid of the solar panels. So get them solar panels off there and get rid of them. Waste of time.
So when did it all come to a head? Because effectively you were ultimately locked out of the venue.
They give us 4.5 days to get out. That was after that, like I said, going back to the clay, that was the last thing.
Because in their mind, they'd reached the milestone 2. In your mind, they hadn't. And on top of that, you've had this document put in front of you where you're being asked to commit to $1 million a year to be there.
Yeah.
So you've said no, and then they give you 4.5 days to vacate.
Yeah. They move all your stuff out.
Did you
we'll keep it.
Did you engage lawyers or? You just battled
but
away.
they'd already warned us before that they're the government. We'll see you in court. We'll drag it on forever until you run out of money, basically. That's how they tell you. And they hire the best. I know these because they're telling us we hire the best lawyers. We poach the best lawyers from the companies because we're the government. We go to court all the time.
True.
That was their answer to it. So what do you think you're going to sit there and take on the government and may win? Probably would have won. It still would win. I mean, our biggest thing is we just wanted to speak to someone from the government and they didn't even have the decency to do that.
So were you given the opportunity to remove your infrastructure that you'd bought in at significant cost? Or were you like padlocked out?
No, they shut the gates out the front, but they give us the time to be in the venue to get everything. Look, we had people in sheds, race teams that had all their gear in the sheds. So we had to notify them to move all your stuff, or they can potentially, in 4.5 days, they can lock us out altogether and you won't come in at all. And then we have to go deal with them, or they would have to deal with the government trying to get their stuff back. Yep. In our case, with the all the stuff that we'd put in the catering side of things, we spent a lot of money there. It was over $500,000 in the catering because we utilised that over the 8 years that you're going to be there. And Scott, you know Scott, he's a big fella, and he told us he likes food. He said so. That was his expertise, and it wasn't that way he said it. He'd say it a bit different to that, but he said, I love me food. So that was what he was going to do at the venue, just to notify. Scott was doing IT. He had big screens, Australia had monster trucks, all that sort of thing. So his expertise is to do them sort of things, and that's what he was going to do. So he wanted the best food. He wanted this to do. He had an app. You could buy your food, sit down and watch the race meeting, and order it online and go pick it up. It's ready to go. So he developed them sort of things, so we had to we're thinking, what are we going to do with all this stuff? It's all brand new. We bought brand new equipment, all the stainless steel, the state-of-the-art burger things, the whole things that he did. Yep. And we think, well, this is all going to go, we're going to lose all of this, or they're going to give you a period of time to negotiate how to get that out of there.
All right, so the checkered flag falls on your time, your company's tenure as promoter. It took a massive toll on you personally, and I know your wife Kathy, and undoubtedly Scott too. And as I've mentioned twice now, the ridicule on social media was awful, unjust, not accurate, with a lot of people assuming a lot of things. So it would have been a particularly difficult time for you with the emotional torment and the financial damage as well. Western Sydney Parklands, was that the entity that gave you 4.5 days to get out, or the state government?
No, Western Sydney Parklands.
Western Sydney Parklands. I think people watching this might wonder, why now? Why have you decided to go public with the nonsense that went on behind the scenes now? Were you gagged?
To an extent, we were gagged. We were told at first you weren't allowed to because they were still holding our money.
What, you weren't allowed to?
You weren't allowed to
speak.
talk to them. So Kathy and Scott decided that they didn't want to say anything at all. And I'm thinking, and I'm biting my tongue the whole time because I never got involved too much with confrontation with them or anything like that. I left that to Scott. Not that there was major problems, because they just treated you like idiots. They didn't understand. We knew the industry. They didn't have a clue what they were doing. And that is understandable. I mean, these people didn't know how to build a speedway, didn't know what they were in for, but they wouldn't listen. That was the frustrating part from our point of view, was that they wouldn't listen. So then when we ended up, like I said, we had the catering stuff and we had other equipment there that we'd put into the facility, and then we were trying to get them to buy that stuff back, which in the end we ended up doing a deal, less government depreciation, of course, of what we had to prove, receipts and things like that for it. So someone there now, I presume, has got the luxury of having all that equipment that we had to pay for, but I mean, saying that we did get some money back for that, but someone else is going to get to utilise that, which we'd paid for. And that's even now, that's my frustration, is that we couldn't say anything because they were going to pay us the money and then they were going to put a gag order on us. They said, then you'll have to sign a disclosure. Well, I was never going to sign that disclosure. And why I'm talking to you now probably is because it's been a couple of years, and the frustration is they've had 2 new managers there running the place.
The debacle has continued beyond your tenure.
And it will never be fixed, I'm telling anybody now, until that government sits down with myself and Kathy and Scott to a degree, but Kathy and myself, and go through where the problem started, how they misled people, what they built wasn't satisfactory for a speedway. Like there's a guy in Queensland built a speedway now, Bob McCosker, in Gladstone, done a fantastic job, absolutely A+, sensational speedway facility, and built it for $8 million. He used his own equipment and all that sort of thing. He does roads and everything. But, I mean, it is first-class speedway facility for under $8 million. It's sure it doesn't have a bitumen pit area and a bitumen car park, but, I mean, you could put all them sort. I'm sure we've got a lot of money to play with in $8 million, but it's a great racetrack, everything about it. You think this guy can do that, and these people spend all this money and can get it so wrong.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying. When you come back to, I'm speaking now because I'm sick of the frustration. They've destroyed speedway racing.
Totally.
The government in New South Wales, and they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, they've got the sport's blood on their hands.
Yeah. The numbers are terrible.
A sport that's like 103 years old.
Yeah.
And to further embellish the heartache, when your organisation left, I'm led to believe a bankrupt was appointed.
Yeah.
As with the promotional rights, if that's the correct term. Which, hello, how can that even be explained? I don't think we need to dwell on it, but that didn't last very long. And former touring car driver Gary Wilmington came in and was involved, and then he left. And that expired, and then the next decision was to grant the lease or the rights to Western Sydney Dragway, which
no, to Sydney Western. They were always next after us. So, which is another thing.
They missed the tender initially, so
they lost. They didn't get it. So the government, and we told them that's 3 months into the thing. You need to re-tender this.
So the Dragway got control after you.
After us, yeah.
So where's the appointment of a bankrupt come into it then?
Through Dragway. So the interesting part in your lease, in the original lease agreements, which would have been the same one as they would have got, you weren't allowed to sublease. You're not allowed to sublease. Your Dragway sublease. So they got to sublease. Gary Wilmington then worked for them. Okay. So Gary, and I know these, so I spoke to Gary, and Gary's a nice guy. They hadn't met the milestones even when Gary was there. They were still having problems. There's complications. I mean, we can go into that later if you want. But, with the water and all them sort of things, which were still ongoing costs. And that's another cost on top of this Ocean Protect, is the water that runs off into a tank then fills up with all the silt and all the clay because of the way it was designed. You've got to get a pump in and pump trucks to pump all the clay and stuff back out of the tanks. At another huge cost, apparently is $100 and something thousand a year. Another cost. It's since come on. So from there, then Gary left, and I guess then Dragway tried to. Originally, when in their tender document, there was a few other people in Speedway before. There was a couple of guys that were interested in running the Speedway through Dragway. They were going to sublease to these other people, and a couple of them did make contact with us, but apparently you weren't allowed to speak to the previous tenants because we knew all the problems with the venue. So, but as soon as these people asked questions,
that was in some way a minor gag order there.
Yeah. So they didn't gag us, but they weren't supposed to speak to us, who might have known what was going on. So they were just basically going to cover up once again the real costs of running that venue.
Okay, so the Drags at the helm of Western Sydney Speedway, and I should also mention, just a matter of hours before we sat down and had this chat today, Mitch Biner, who was the general manager at Western Sydney Speedway, resigned, and I called him today to clarify that, and he did. It's true. So we go from your organisation, Dragway seizes control. Somehow a bona fide bankrupt is involved in the mix there, and then that changes, and the Dragway is totally responsible still. Mitch Biner, whom I've just mentioned, leaves. But did you say earlier that Western Sydney Dragway, somebody at the helm there is an ex-Labor politician? Did I mishear that?
Yeah, no, the general manager apparently is Tony Buick. He's ex-politician from Liverpool, apparently.
Okay.
He's a Labor politician from Liverpool. So whether there's a tie-up there, I don't know. So the Dragway get a lot of government grants. See, this is the silly part about life in general, is that if you're a non-for-profit organisation, you can get government grants. But people like myself weren't allowed to get any grants. We're not even allowed to get a handout. Look, we could have sat there and negotiated, and that's all documented, that they wanted to have it talk to us. We sent them a letter stating that we wanted to talk about the lease and all these costings. We wanted to meet with the government at the time, which was Scully. And we go to a meeting at Parramatta, they call us to, and we're sitting there talking to three women. Scully's not there. Three women, two with smirks on their face that we'd already been dealing with over the years, and they just sat there with a grin on their face. We're saying, we're here to talk to you. So it's a bit like sending the kid to the school principal office, but he's already dealt with you before. You're going back to the... It's just crazy.
It's the greatest mess I've heard in sport, certainly in motorsport. So we have a venue that was built in good faith to replace the long-standing Parramatta City Raceway that had been in existence since 1978. The budget for the new development is $40 million. It's around $130 million. They didn't listen. They did it all wrong. They thwarted your ability to operate successfully. Then they present a document asking you to sign for $1 million a year commitment. You were given 4.5 days to leave when you tell them you're not going to do that. And
I would just say
the drag strip takes over. There's a bankrupt in the mix, and now an organisation with a former Labor politician allegedly is involved. I mean, really? I mean, this is just unbelievable.
Just going back to that million, we did disclose this to them early in the piece. This was very early in the piece that we notified them that we weren't spending that money. There was no way in the world, and that was a meeting we had around the road with the Western Sydney Parklands Trust at the time, or representatives. We only ever met with the trust, the head of the trust, once, and that was in the office of Parramatta. But the other one, when we met with them, was to disclose that we're not going to spend that money, and they said, no, we're not going to either. And we're thinking that, we're on the same page here. We've told you open 3 months in that we're not going to pay this $1 million, mate. You can't make $1 million. And they, no, you're right. So we're thinking that they're going to go to Sydney Metro, who are paying for this, to sort this out. All along, they just figured that they were going to get us to pay it. So, I mean, they were notified this 15 months before that this you couldn't afford to run a speedway with that sort of cost. And it's all down to the design fault that is clearly flawed. And that wasn't disclosed on how this was going to happen. You know, the other thing, which is another major problem with Speedway, is you need water. You've got DRAGWAY next door that's complaining about dust, but we need water. So this place is going to hold 1.25 million litres of water. It's going to be on site. And the reason is, I explained to them, you're going to use probably 200,000 litres of water a show and an event per meeting. That's no problem. We've got enough to last 6. The way the Sydney weather was while we were there was topping up every day. But at the time, we would at least be able to do 6 events on the tank water that's there. Well, they're not allowed to hold that. They're not allowed to retain any more of that under Blacktown City Council. They're allowed 250,000 litres of water because of the water in case of floods and things like that, and 100-year flood thing. So they were never allowed to have this amount of water. Yet they built a tank, supposedly, that holds 1 million litres in the infield that is cracked, broken, been numerous things. We tried to get to find out exactly how many litres of water this tank holds. So all the runoff of the water off the top of the grandstand, off the top of the hills, off the pit area, washes into this area that feeds into the tank, so you've got water to feed. There's 2 tanks, one in the pit area. That's another, so that's 250 as well. Apparently, don't really know if it does hold that, but the 250 in the infield, it's clearly not the million, but the tank is that big, supposedly. There was one of the ladies who was a consultant for him at the time. She met us. Finally, we got a person that wanted to take some notice. And she asked the question. We'd asked numerous times, how big is that tank? They'd tell you, go work it out. It's so many areas, square, this, that, and this is how you work it out. I said, well, if it's that easy, you tell us how many litres, you put it in there. And when she asked the question, she said, maybe she was from New Zealand, she said, well, at my farms, we used to have 2 30,000 litre tanks that held 30,000 each tank. How much does this hold? They couldn't answer. This was with her asking these people how much the water holds, but in actual fact, it can't hold that much. So then that became a problem because then we had to use town water. So then there was no pressure from the town water. Wasn't enough pressure there for the town water. So then they'd put pumps in, but that becomes another problem because the pumps weren't adequate, and these sort of things. You know, when you turn the water on to feed the tank when you run out of water, because there wasn't enough water to do a race meeting, you'd turn around and you'd have to use the town water. So if you use the town water, if you turned it on, there was no water in the toilets, no water in the taps. You know, it would totally take them out if you tried to fill the water truck up. So that was another issue.
John, I'm sure that we could talk about this for weeks. And I know that you're very angry, disappointed, for many reasons, not least of which is your beloved sport has been destroyed to a large extent. Not saying that it can't come back. And this chat today was certainly not about damaging the sport.
No.
It was just about being transparent and you having the opportunity to present the facts as they were. And it's really good that you've done that. I'll let you have the last say, and I thank you for your time. What do you want to happen?
I want an inquiry from the government to come down and sit down, like I said, with myself and Kathy and Scott if he wants to be involved, and to discuss where we're going to go with this. I mean, I still have interest. You want to go back? Oh, I'd go back. I mean, it's a challenge, but I mean, they have totally
not for $1 million a year.
Oh no! They'd have to sit down. I mean, that's the place in Perth, the Motorplex. They get government grants to operate that facility, and this is the only way this place is going to operate now.
And that was
didn't design
same thing. It was a mirror, if you like, example. The government wants to close Claremont Showground, which had been there for
forever.
I can't remember. 90-something, whatever it was. So they built this magnificent facility, arguably the best speedway in the world, at Kwinana Beach. And I know when you walk in there, you're proud. You're proud to be a part of the sport. And so what they were doing on the East Coast was exactly like that, but it turned out to be nothing like that.
No, it's a disaster. I mean, it really is. I don't really know what else you sum it up with. I mean, it was built wrong. I mean, the issues with the water, that's another thing. You know, we can go through that. You know, they had the infield drain was higher than the outside by 500 mil, so water wouldn't run out. So that was another problem. They put drains in. Well, the drains actually make it worse because that feeds them tanks. And that's where you come into another cost of having to empty these things. So until they sit down and actually want to talk about it, not just everything they did was bodgy up. That's basically what they did.
Well,
in the end.
What approach have you got then?
Well, we tried to meet
potentially bring the government to the table and sort this out.
At the time when we did close, Channel 9 had rang, Channel 7 rang, all these stations were ringing.
There was a lot of media.
But we couldn't speak. So at the time they sort of had their hands tied because I was more worried about getting the bit of money we were going to get back, getting some of that back. I got a property bought in Sydney here. Another white elephant, you know, got rid of a place on the Gold Coast, Kathy's place, and we got a place here in Sydney they've still got. Yeah. If they give me money back for that, it'd be good. But these sort of things with the money that we outlay, we actually invested in the place. Dragway's invested nothing. They're utilising. We bought all the skills. We were made consultants for this group, and weren't getting paid. And they weren't listening. And they weren't listening. That's the worst part about it. They weren't taking a word of notice on anything. And you're trying to explain to them, this is how Speedway operates. This is what you need to do. I mean, it's like I said, I still think you could turn it around, but you won't unless they sit down and go, righto, and they want to be fair dinkum about it. Otherwise, like I said, when I rang the general manager of Parklands at the time, well, they're still probably there. I haven't spoke to them. But it said, you know, this place here is going to be like the Sydney Showground. It should be here in 50 years' time or 100 years' time or whatever. Is that what they want, or they want Dragway? This is the stupid part about this. The Dragway would be like putting the AFL in charge of the NRL or the NRL in charge of the AFL. It just doesn't work. And you've got the people that benefited the most is Sydney's Dragway, has benefited the most out of this. They never put it back to a tender, to another lease, which I suggested. I don't want to have an inquiry into it because they're going to pay, the taxpayers are going to pay more money. Right. So I'm sick of these inquiries that turn around and the governments go get another 50 of their mates to go and sit down and have an inquiry and spend millions and millions of dollars on something that I can give you the answers to these problems straight away, and you want to address them, or do you just want to keep brushing them away and just hope the sport disappears and they shut it down and turn it into market garden? They're already turning around now. The sheds out there are being leased out for businesses. It's built for a speedway.
Really?
Yeah, they're renting the place out. They've got half the pit area at the moment is taken away because they've got some movie studio in there. I mean, all these things, this is built for as a speedway. Shouldn't it be utilised as a speedway?
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. You're an Iron
I
Man.
look forward to catching up with someone from the real mate. Like I said, this is really a 60-minute story. Really, it's that big. I said that's why I didn't want to talk to Channel 9 or 7 at the time, was because I said, what are you going to get 30 seconds of an interview about the thing when it's a 60-minute story, mate? This is government grossly misusing taxpayers' money, which they're great at.
Yep. Gross mismanagement, ineptness, and, as you say, a blatant waste of taxpayer money. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Dave.
Hope you've enjoyed it. They are the facts from a man that knows. Hope you've enjoyed episode 1 of Beneath the Surface, and we will see you next time.